Good afternoon, ladies.
Good afternoon.
Our speaker today is Stan Schmidt. Stan is a resident of Vanderburgh County. He is the Special Collection Assistant at Willard Library and has held that position for 11 years. He has worked in land record research as a title searcher for the past 35 years. Stan is a member of the Vanderburgh County Historic Society, where he is currently Vice President and Secretary. He has been President in past years. He is on the board of the Canal Society of Indiana and has been a past editor for the Society. Stan is serving his third term as Vanderburgh County Historian. Stan has written many history articles for the Maturity Journal and Evansville Living magazines. He has been seen on WNIN history programs, local media interviews on local history. He has been the history presenter at various local venues throughout the tri-state area. Stan received his Bachelor of Arts degree from Indiana University. He researched the Vanderburgh family for a program at the Evansville Museum during Vanderburgh County Bicentennial in 2018. So it now gives me great pleasure to present to you Mr. Stan Schmidt, historian for Vanderburgh County, who will speak to us today on Captain Henry Vanderburgh.
Today you're getting a shorter version of the program I did down at the museum for the Vanderburgh County Bicentennial. One of the things there, and for people, you're all done genealogy, there is quite a bit on the Vanderburgh family. Genealogies that have been published, data out there. Henry Vanderburgh was actually his great-great-grandfather, so you're going that far back. Early Dutch, New York City area. Lucas Dirksen Vanderburgh was sergeant for the Dutch West Indies Company, military protecting the colony in New York. And he retired from the military and he moved into downtown New York. The original Vanderburgh family home would be at 21 Broadway, down at the base of Manhattan. If you look a lot of times there downtown, there's always, you see these two statues, the bull and the bear for Wall Street there. Behind that, that's the Vanderburgh home there. So it's down there in an area like that, you know, that now is worth a whole lot more. The family over the years, they moved up the Hudson River Valley. A lot of the Dutch settlers, even after it's converted over to an English colony, had large estates up through the Hudson Valley. And the Vanderburghs are no different there. By the time you get though to Henry Vanderburgh, the family's farther up north. He's in Troy area there. And the families were large. One of the things though is Vanderburgh can be spelled all different ways there. It's one word, it's three words, it's got the V abbreviated. You know, you can kind of look all different directions. So, what I'm going to start with today, this is taken from the Vincennes Western Sun on April 25th, 1812. There, and it's a brief article. All-powerful God, thou art the last and greatest hope of man. Departed from this life on Sunday morning, the 5th instant, at his dwelling house in Vincennes, the Honorable Henry Vanderburgh, one of the judges of the territory, in his 52nd year of age. As a judge, he was benevolent and just. As a husband and parent, he was the most kind and indulgent. As a citizen, he was urbane, and as a man, he wants not the pen of mortals, for he is, I hope, written in the book of life. His corpse was taken on the 6th instant at 3 p.m. to his farm about a mile southeast of town, under a large escort of Masonic brothers and one from Colonel Miller's command of the 4th United States Regiment of Infantry, with the band of the most, numerous collection of the most respectable citizens, where it was interned with the honors of masonry and of war. An appropriate prayer was offered up and given of all good by Reverend S. Scott. The procession then returned in perfect decorum there, each back in its original station, and the whole thing being under the command of Lieutenant Hawkins. The martial day ended theretofore. And after the brief article there, there's a notice then from the Masons in Vincennes that they recommended everyone there for the next month wear crepe there on their shoulder as a sign of respect. Now, what's interesting is right underneath Henry Vanderburgh's obituary, there's a notice, and it's, "I intend making applications in the next term of the Court of Common Pleas of Knox County, Indiana Territory, for leave to establish a ferry on the Ohio 3/4 of a mile above the mouth of Big Pigeon, from my land in the territory on the side opposite shore." And it's signed Hugh McGarry. And it's probably the only place where you get a connection between Henry Vanderburgh and the county that was named after him there. It's just kind of a little bit of ironic publication there that the ferry notice there for Hugh McGarry setting up his ferry. He's at this point in 1812, he's laid out the town of Evansville there. So Judge Henry Vanderburgh is there, or Captain Henry Vanderburgh. He has all these titles there in his life. As I said, he's buried there, goes by the article there. He was buried out on his farm southeast of Vincennes. And when you read the other comments at the time, he was buried on the high spot of his farm called Bellevue. And you can, with the land records, you can see what he owned, and you can look on a topographic map and figure out where this is at. And it's 1306 Old Orchard Road in Vincennes. It's in the Burnett Heights subdivision now. And over time, they have tried to find him. Down at Green Lawn Cemetery in Vincennes, there is a memorial stone that the DAR put up for him. But over time, they've never been able to find him on the property of where he should be. There is a huge tree there, which could, be a major problem there. But anyway, we'll go back though to the early years. He was born in 1759 in Troy, New York. So it's upstate at the time. He was the son of William and Margaret Vanderburgh. Where he comes in, and for the DAR, is in 1775, he enlists in the New York 3rd Regiment as a corporal. He's 15 years old. He takes part in the Canadian campaign that year, 1776 into the winter. The Americans trying to convince the Canadians to join the rebellion marched up through New York State and also up through Maine. And they captured Montreal. In the process of capturing Quebec, General Montgomery was killed. And the siege kind of just wore on until the Americans, between illness and then when spring came, the rivers opened up and stuff, and the British Navy was allowed to come back then to relieve Quebec. So this early campaign there, he's already there as a corporal. That's what say age 15. He goes up there. The following year, he is promoted already at age 16 now to a first lieutenant there in the 5th New York Regiment. And Henry Vanderburgh, he shows up in places that, when you look at history now, You know, it's that he was there. There's other places where he should have been and wasn't. They sent him somewhere else then. And instead of being, and I'll talk this later, he should have been at Yorktown when the war ended there. They had him guarding supply boats in upstate New York then, where the rest of the regiment was in Virginia there. So there's things like that happened to him. But New York was a really strategic place during the war. The British captured New York City in 1776 and did not leave until 1783. So throughout the war, the Americans under George Washington are somewhere camped around New York there. You're trying to keep the British in, you're trying to keep a threat that if they leave, the Americans will move in. In 1777, the British decide to do what the French had done before, try to cut the New England colonies away from the rest of the country. And it's the Hudson Valley, Lake Champlain corridor that goes from Canada down through there. If you can control that, you split New England off. And the one thing for the British, why this was really important too, the Hudson River all the way up to Albany there is a deep river for large ships there. The British had total control of the ocean, the Navy there. So to keep the British in New York, at first, about 40 miles north of New York there's an area where the river makes a series of bends, it narrows. After New York City had fallen, the Americans began to build fortifications at, it's in the Poughkeepsie area, but Fort Clinton, Fort Montgomery, and the main thing there is they put a metal chain across the river to block the river. So you have cannons, you've got that to keep the British ships away, but it's designed to keep the British from coming farther upriver. In 1777, the British leave Canada coming down from the north, heading for the Hudson River. They're supposed to meet the British coming from New York the other way, and then there's a third army coming across from the Buffalo area, the Mohawk Valley. And the idea was they were going to take central New York then, and that would, in their mind, end the war. What didn't happen is the British didn't cooperate with themselves. Burgoyne is defeated at Saratoga. The British force that comes up from New York, they attack Fort Montgomery, Fort Clinton, they cut the chain, they end up, the Americans burn the ships they had guarding it. In that battle though, is Henry Vanderburgh's regiment. They're part of the guard there at the forts there. The British took over one fort, the rest of the regiment there pretty much fought to keep them out so everybody else could escape. The captain of Henry Vanderburgh's company, he is captured, made a prisoner of war. We can't tell for sure from the records, but after this time period, Henry Vanderburgh is posted as being ill and away from the regiment. And a lot of the ones that remained there had been shot, bayoneted, whatever else then. So whether or not that's why he was absent after this time, it's a possibility. It's one of those where it's actually a probability. He comes back, the Americans are still guarding the Hudson Valley. They now move a little bit farther up the river, and the place where they're now going to keep the British away becomes West Point. There, a whole new series of fortifications are built. It's one of those where this is where the main part of the army is staying there. And when you get then into 1780, coming out of this there, his West Point days, that's also the time then where Washington appoints a new commander at West Point, who is Benedict Arnold. So he is now, at this point, he's been promoted to captain there. His regiment is stationed at West Point or in the environs there. You get the time period where Benedict Arnold there is making arrangements to sell the plans and stuff of West Point to the British. So it ends up, we know what happens there. His contact from the British is captured, and the whole plot unravels there. Arnold runs down river to New York, gets away. So nothing happened, but it's one of those, here's Henry Vanderburgh in that same, where stuff is going on. You get in that time period also coming through, the war's been going on for a while now. I mean, he's been there since 1775 there. It is harder to get people to serve, it's harder to keep people to serve. They end up combining regiments there. They don't have enough people there. You're trying to get new people to enlist. So he ends up there, his regiment now is made part of another regiment. And anyway, when you look at Henry Vanderburgh's records, Fold 3, which is Ancestry's military records there, they have everything you could ever want about Henry Vanderburgh there. And then later his wife, then the pension records, the same thing there. The Henry Vanderburgh story there, for original documentation is very accessible. 1783, I mentioned there at Yorktown, he should have been there. His regiment moved south to Virginia. He's on, supply protection duty instead, so he misses the end of the war. The war there, Cornwallis surrenders, but the war doesn't end, and it makes it even worse now trying to keep soldiers. The British are still occupying New York. The army is still trying to, have a presence around to keep the British from going anywhere else there. By this time, 1782, 1783, the United States, the colonies there are broke. I mean, past broke. They've borrowed from the Dutch, from the British, not from the British, from the French, from the Spanish, anywhere else they can borrow money from. Soldiers from the common up to the officers are not getting paid, and the American Army is camped just below West Point in the Newburgh area up there. The New Windsor Cantonment was the main location for the American Army. And here, as they had down at Morristown, there, people, they're willing to fight, they believe in the cause, but it's, I need pay. I've got family at home, I've got there. And what happens is you have a series of mutinies, and Washington tries to be, as lenient as he can. A lot of people get pardoned, but other people are court-martialed and shot. Washington kind of had a flair at times that they would bring the person out there, they had the grave dug, they had the coffin there, and the firing squad was there, and they went through all the, the official business, and the guy's ready to be shot, and they would pardon him. It was that, it wasn't that, okay, everybody that's, done something, okay, we're gonna shoot you there. But at that time there, there's it's called the Newburgh Conspiracy. And what it comes out, most of the little mutinies had involved the common soldiers there. In the Newburgh Conspiracy there, it's now the officers. They have not gotten paid. The government has promised them back wages, extra back wages. They promised them land. All these things there, when it gets into Congress, they can't decide. So nothing's being accomplished there. You get a group of officers are trying now, talking about marching to Philadelphia to Congress there. And it's, depending on what history you're going on, there's newer versions there. This is anything from a real threat to the military taking over the government, or it's just a means of really putting forward their position there. And so what happens here is there's several meetings there of all the officers there of the Army, And at this point, Henry Vanderburgh is captain of a company, so he's present at these meetings. It's one of those where several different versions are going through of what they need to do. And you end up, at the New Windsor Cantonment, there was this large kind of auditorium where the officers could meet for stuff there. And that was where these meetings were held. And they are ready to do something. And it's one of those defining George Washington moments there. They're all there. Washington makes an appearance at this meeting of all his officer staff there. He wasn't invited, and it was kind of out of decorum that he should have showed up by the way he did. But he comes into this meeting, and that's what I say, Henry Vanderburgh would have been here. Comes in, goes up to the stage up in front, and he starts to address his officers that you guys have been around, you've been loyal, you're going. And as he starts this meeting then, and he goes through, what you've all suffered, he stops for a moment and he takes out his glasses, puts them on, and most people had never seen him in glasses there at this point. Has his little notes, and he's there like you, my job being in charge of this army, my eyesight is failing. I am suffering too. And the reports at the time there, like General Knox, and he's got his officer corps there all weeping in front of him. And he's telling them that, this is a civilian government. We're just part of that. And it goes through all of the what they were talking about doing. The military officer corps then finally decides that they will wait and see what Congress will do there. So anyway, though, as we get through this, after this there, in May of 1783, Henry Vanderburgh is granted furlough. This was one of the problems, as I said before, they had no money to pay anybody there. If they discharged soldiers, Henry Vanderburgh being one of them there, if you discharged them, you had to pay them up to what they owed you to leave there. If you sent everybody home on furlough, it's not like we've retired you out of the army. You're just going home on leave, so we don't have to pay you anything. So that was what they ended up doing with much of the army there. It's several months later that, the news has come now that the war is over, but the British don't actually leave New York until November of 1783. So it's not until then that they can release the whole army. We do know that after he got out of the army, Henry Vanderburgh went back and studied law. And whether he studied with another attorney, an apprentice type, or if he went to school, we're not sure. But what happens there is he had been promised 1,800 acres of land by the state of New York for his military service. Like most people, even down to the privates, he sold it off for a fraction of what it was worth to get some money there. And it was one of his commanding officers that bought the property from him then. What you get then is, for some reason, and this is still conjecture there, in the fall of 1787, he packs up from New York and travels to Vincennes, Indiana. There, Indiana Territory there. And well, actually at that point it wasn't, it was still part of the Northwest Territory. Besides, okay, if you're not, from up east New York there, Vincennes now would be considered a small, out in the middle of nowhere. In 1787, Vincennes is as far as you can get from anywhere there. The only places in Indiana or out in this area there are a couple more French areas over along the Mississippi River, but at least those are close to St. Louis, the Spanish area like that. Vincennes is a couple hundred people out in the boonies. and why Henry Vanderburgh would pack up from New York in an area that's rapidly settling and come west is still kind of a strange idea. He is an attorney. He's coming to an area where for years he was the only real attorney. But when he was in the Canadian campaign, there were a number of French Canadians who fought for the Americans, stayed then after that in the American Army. And one of these people was John Francis Hamtramck. And he was in Henry Vanderburgh's regiment. As through his whole career, he was a captain when Vanderburgh was a lieutenant. When Henry Vanderburgh was promoted to captain, Hamtramck was promoted to colonel. So there's this connection with him and Hamtramck. After the war is over, the American Army is down to like 100 and something people. Some are at West Point, some are at Pittsburgh. As the country population starts moving west, the only government in the West originally was what was became the 1st Regiment of the U.S. Army. And one of the officers of that regiment who stayed in the Army was John Francis Hamtramck. He was moved west, and in the spring, early summer of 1787, he is sent to Vincennes, where the Army now establishes a new fort called Fort Knox, and he is commander for the next 4 years there. And there has to be some kind of connection there. For Henry Vanderburgh, who had been in service almost his whole time in military units that were connected with John Francis Hamtramck there. And now he is stationed in Vincennes, Indiana, and within 6 months, Henry Vanderburgh is in Vincennes, Indiana there. What proof there, isn't really there. He comes out to Indiana. They know he was there in the fall. The first documents that he signed are in January of 1788. And he, like I said, he is an attorney. And that was, important at the time. The French who had been there before they had land claims, but they don't have deeds or anything. They're from the French government back, or from the English government after that there. So the French residents around Vincennes are trying to prove that they actually own land and stuff. So you do need somebody there, kind of an advocate. He's also storekeeper, and this probably helps too. He's supplying supplies to the Army in Vincennes there, which is his friend from the last 8 years. And he gets in with the local French settlers. The reason the Army came to Vincennes in 1787 was the people from Virginia come with George Rogers Clark to that area, had stayed around. There was a clash between them and the French settlers. Both of them had different ideas of how things worked there. The French, you had small farms, you trapped, you traded, like that, and it was not a really let's go out and make all the money we can attitude there. The Virginians coming in, all they saw were that these French people were lazy. Look, there's land everywhere and you're not farming it, you're not cutting the trees down, you're not looking for, and so there's this different kind of perspective on what it means to use the land. You end up then with the French finally appealed to Washington. Well, Washington's not the capital, Philadelphia at the time. But they appeal there. It's like, these people, they're not following the laws, they're not doing this. So the only thing the United States had at that time then was you sent the Army to the West. And that was not just military protection, but that was the bringing of government there into an area. So anyway, you're in an area now that's changing. Everything north of the Ohio River, which is Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, parts of Minnesota, are all in the Northwest Territory there. And that's the original, what we're talking about. It's not until 1790 then that Knox County is created. And here, out in the middle of nowhere, is Henry Vanderburgh, and he's there at the best time you could be here. Everything's starting from scratch, and I'm an attorney there. I've now, got in with the French families there. I've got a relationship with them. So in 1790 there, as Knox County's created there, he's on the first grand jury ever held in Knox County Court. He's also promoted there. He's made major of the Knox County Militia. In 1791, he's made Justice of the Peace and probate judge for Knox County. And that's also the year that he marries Francois Cournoyer. He marries one of the French settlers' daughters there. Henry Vanderburgh at the time was 32, she was 16 there. But he's now even more a part of the French neighborhood there. That same year, and this is, now that they have a court and stuff there, Henry Vanderburgh there, court orders him to have a pillory or stocks set up in the square in front of the church to punish people. So he's got a job to do that. 1792, him and Francis Vigo, who's another important person up there, they're both commissioned to license taverns and merchants in Knox County. In 1793, there's always this problem there with Native Americans and when they bring alcohol. And so they got that problem in Knox County now like that, where they set up a commission there, and Henry Vanderburgh is one of the three men that decide who gets booze and how much booze they get. And this is, mostly for visiting Indians and stuff, which when you look at it there, it's like, okay, yeah, you come and visit here and you're coming to sign treaties there. They decided how much booze they got there. So, this whole series, let's see, in 1797, and it's the connection with the French, he's put on the commission to examine the French land claims. So you've got land he bought, he also gets land through his French relatives there. 1798 there, the Northwest Territory, they need a civilian government for the whole area. They have elections in anywhere where you had the men over a certain age, white males, that were allowed to vote. So this is Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. They're all picked out delegates then. They met the following year in Cincinnati. 10 people were chosen to be on the legislative council. The names were sent to the president for approval. Henry Vanderburgh is one of the people that they picked then. Within that council then, they had an executive legislative council of 5 members. Not only is Henry Vanderburgh a member of the legislative council, he becomes president of the legislative council there. And then let's see here, okay, then the main thing then is in 1800 now, and this is where you get there. He's appointed one of 3 territorial judges there. Now, every court that's held in the Northwest Territory, and like I said, that's from Ohio to Illinois up to Michigan, Wisconsin there. The judges travel. It's not where you have a courthouse. There at most places there, you don't have standing towns. So I know there, the one year there, he held court in Kaskaskia, Illinois, which is over near the Mississippi River. He held court in Detroit, and he held court in Vincennes there. This is get on your horse and go through the woods if there is a trail, or find a trail. The statement was that when he traveled on these court trips, he went with his one-man servant, and that was it. You had no escort. So it's one of those, okay, what Indian's waiting for me because I'm white there, but you had your court circuit. Question there, and when they say his manservant, 1787, the Northwest Ordinance forbade slavery north of the Ohio River. The problem is the French already had slaves there. You have people, they had Native American slaves, they had African American slaves there. That was part of the old French, part of the Virginia settlers coming up from the south there. And nobody really knew what to do about it. George Turner was another judge. He argued that it was one of those where if you crossed the Ohio River into the north, you were free if you were a slave. There are other people, it's like, well, we've had these, you have to let. Henry Vanderburgh, we know he did have several slaves there. So it's one of those where that manservant that was with him when he did his court travels, whether or not it was one of his slaves or indentured servants there, if it was a person of color then. But he travels around, that's what I say. Then he gets more into, when he's in town, he's got other jobs to do. In 1802, 1800 into that, he becomes one of the first county commissioners for Knox County. He's also involved with trustee of setting up the Jefferson Academy. And this is the first school out in this part of the world there. They went and applied for government land to help fund this. It was one for the locals, and it was also designed to educate Native American children there. In 1803, he's superintendent to build the Knox County Jail. 1804 to 1807 there, he's a trustee, and he's involved in the founding of Vincennes University. They received a large grant of land from the federal government for this college. When they finally started to build, part of the property they needed there was a deed from Henry Vanderburgh and his wife to the trustees to begin construction of the university. In 1805, he's in the first General Assembly for the Indiana Territory meets there. You have a legislative Congress there. Judge Vanderburgh there is to administer the oath to all the members of the new legislature there, and the governor, like that. At that same time there, when you looked at people, how much land they owned, how much taxable stuff there, Henry Vanderburgh is number 3 on the list after Francis Vigo and William Henry Harrison. So he's acquired land in all different places in Knox County. He had land over in Daviess County, which didn't exist yet. You remember at this point there, Knox County is pretty much all of Indiana and parts of Michigan and Illinois. And he was also involved, and this is coming out of the Army, with the foundation there of the Masons in Indiana and Vincennes there. He continues all these jobs. They got him, he's superintendent, helped to build the county courthouse. I said the jail there. It's kind of anything in administration, they're looking for him. He dies in 1812, in April. And it's one of those where, at that point, he had 9 children. His wife had the 10th one a month and a half after Henry Vanderburgh passed there. He's got land, he's got everything there, except none of the sons are old enough yet there. His wife Francois is one where, you know, to raise a family, everything else, she doesn't have any money there. They end up appealing to the Indiana Territory Legislature for relief there for the family there. His will, it's one of those where, and let me just real quick here. In his will, he gives his wife, and that the way things were done at the time, it went to his wife, but only as long as she was alive. It actually goes to the kids there. So it goes down this list of all stuff he owns there. And it includes 2 slaves, it includes 2 indentured servants there. And it's kind of complicated at the time. The War of 1812 starts at this point, right after he passes there. People leave the north, it's not safe. There, northern Vincennes, there people are killed by Indians. The fort up at Terre Haute is besieged. There, Fort Wayne, the fort is besieged. The fort up at Chicago is destroyed. There, so people have kind of left Indiana at that time there. So, where she could have sold land or she could have done something else, people aren't interested right now. It goes on. Francois Vanderburgh, she marries 2 more times. She kills off 2 husbands. I mean, not literally, but the first one is only alive 2-3 years. The second one's only alive 2-3 years there. So she gets through the 1830s there. She goes back then in the 1840s to her first husband and the father of all the children there, who was the Revolutionary War veteran. And she obtains a pension from the federal government from Henry Vanderburgh then. She does not die until 1860 there. So you're talking there, that much, longer than, Henry there, like that. Henry Vanderburgh there, after the War of 1812, they're creating more new counties in southern Indiana. And the decision was made, and it was for political nature there. A new county is to be created out of Warwick, Posey, and Gibson County land. And in the conversation, there's no problem creating the county there, but General Tipton, who's somewhere is a kinsman of Henry Vanderburgh, when this comes through, he insists that the new county be named after Henry Vanderburgh in honor of him there, and it passes through the Indiana legislature there. And so that's where Vanderburgh County comes in and how there. If you go up to Vincennes, his work on creating Vincennes University, in the center of campus, there's the Henry and Francois Vanderburgh Resident Hall still there. I mean, there's other small Vanderburgh things that pop up, but a lot of people there, really don't know how much he had to do with the whole southern Indiana, the state, the area there, in what he did there after he moved to Vincennes. Anything? Question?
So he actually never came to Vanderburgh County?
As far as we know, there was no reason for him ever to come down here.
Okay.
There, I mean, you did have the Red Banks Trace going from Vincennes down to what's now Henderson there. But for what reason he would have had to go, because that's not court or anything that he would have needed to go there. I mean, there, your family and everything else, there, his court duties and stuff are all up there.
Okay.
Like that.
Did Francois remain in Vincennes?
She remained there. She died there. She lived with one of her daughters there. There were 6 girls. There were 3 boys. There was another child that died young. So of the 10 children, like that, 9 survived.
So she married 2 more times after him. What was her last name when she died?
She was Brulé. She married a Louds, and then she married Pierre there. Yeah, so there, but it's one of those where all of the boys have died without children. The oldest one there, William Henry Vanderburgh, he across the Mississippi, he was a famous trapper explorer there, and it got him killed there. But it's one of those. The daughters, though, married into different families like that, and so almost all the family that stayed around are buried up in Vincennes. They're in the cemetery, except for Henry, who's somewhere in the backyard.
Under the tree.
There, like that. There. So it's one of those. So the DAR marker is really, the only thing there in Vincennes, like that to commemorate, his life and his duty then, like that.
Okay.
But yeah.
When our President General was in Indianapolis, and she joined our chapter, and that's why Denise Van Buren,
And she was from Troy, New York.
right, thank you very much. And she went to high school with Vanderburghs.
Yeah, and see, he left a whole bunch of brothers and sisters there up in New York like that. He went in the Army at 15. He had a brother who went in about the same time, was 14. Then up in New York like that during the Revolution, like that. But apparently, and that's always though the why he picked up and moved from civilization to the middle of nowhere, like he did there, and away from his family. He did have a sister, and her husband moved from New York to Vincennes in 1811. So one of his sisters did move out to Indiana then after, but it was fairly short, because he passed away then in April the next year then. But anything else?
The address that you said they thought he was buried, is that in town, or is that?
It's east over toward Highway 41. It's kind of back behind the golf course, the country, but it's a development that's been there for a while, like that. But it's just, when you look at the land on a map, what he owned, and then when you look there where it shows the elevations there, the whole thing was his farm, Bellevue. He was buried on the hill, the highest point, and that's where that hill still is there, off Old Orchard Road there, like that. There, so I mean, that's, unless they, looked at the hill and it's like, oh, well, that one's higher there. This is, that they didn't bury him at the actual highest point. I mean, he should be in that yard there.
If I could address that for you, having grown up there. Vernon Heights is directly across from Gregg Park.
Yeah.
And it was considered the highest area to keep away from flooding and mosquito populations.
No.
And if you drive up there today, you can easily tell where the highest point is. And there's a huge tree, it'd take 3 or 4 of us to hug. And one year, about 2:09, I went to take a picture of the tree. And the lady who lives there was working in her flowers. And I was on the sidewalk, and she came over and she said, "You must be DAR." And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Are you from here?" I said, "Actually, Bridgeton, outside of Vincennes." And she said, "Well, we always know when someone's standing on our sidewalk, they're DAR taking a picture of the tree, and the tree has probably consumed him."
Yeah. But yeah, you need a marker though. It's like a few weeks ago downtown when they were doing the water line work there, I don't know how many people came into Willard there, and I finally made a copy there of picture of your marker there, and it's like, do you know that this, because they're all white, why could there be bodies, bones downtown there at 4th and the street there like that? It was kind of there that, they had no idea and were lost. And it's like, right there, you can see it from where they're digging the marker that says the McGarry graveyard.
Exactly.
There like that. But.
Okay.